Story 1. I worked with a man who had a lengthy criminal record. He had a system for getting released when he was caught. After committing a crime, if police pursued him and he was about to be cornered, he acted insane. His girlfriend played along, telling officers he was off his medication. Officers arrested him but sent him to a mental ward with paperwork instructing the ward to release him to police once he was cleared. In the ward, he created a distraction to draw the desk attendant away from the file cabinet. He crawled to the cabinet, found the release to police papers, and ate them. When psychiatric evaluators decided he was stable enough to leave, there were no instructions to return him to police, so the ward released him to the public. He repeated this about 10 times until officers recognized him on the street. The stunt forced the state to change its procedures for detaining mentally unstable suspects. Story 2. My favorite was the man who stole a United States Postal Service mailbox from the street, repainted it, and placed it next to the night deposit box at a bank. He hung an out-of-order sign on the deposit box, and all the businesses came and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox. Story 3. A guy I went to high school with was stealing from Walmart in a clever way. He would grab video games, digital music players, beer, and other items and hide them in a trash can in the garden section. Employees never checked the trash, so he would wait up to 5 hours until they emptied it into the back dumpster, then climb in to retrieve his items. On one occasion, he took a cardboard display box, filled it with video games, a PlayStation 3, and extra controllers, scribbled on it and taped it to make it look used, then tossed it. An hour later, he retrieved a PlayStation 3 and a stack of games. Story 4. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scenes. A man attached GPS trackers to the undersides of homeowners' cars to ensure they would be away while he ransacked their houses. Story 5. I heard about a person who carried out a shoplifting scam at a well-known retail store in the United States. They brought a cheap nylon item to obtain a sticker that read "I walked in with this," a label stores used on returned merchandise. The sticker peeled off the cheap item intact. They then went to the electronics department, took an expensive boxed item from the shelf, and went to customer service. They put the sticker on the box and asked to return the item without a receipt. The employee said the store could not accept a return without the original receipt. The person left. Customer service even gave the doorman a thumbs up after interacting with the customer. This happened before widespread inventory controls and cameras were common. Story 6. This was in the late 1990s to early 2000s. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for multiple 300-person freshman survey courses where he would not be missed, and then never attended class. All he did was go to raves, concerts, and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story and was put on probation for a semester. He repeated the same pattern that fall. At the end of the year, he was expelled and did not care. He made about $150,000 in return for about $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. As far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been short-sighted in the long run, but in the short term, it seemed ingenious to use federal loans to start a drug business. Story 7. When I was younger, I worked in a home improvement store. A man came in, went to the snow blowers, took one, and brought it to the return desk. He said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him he needed a receipt, so he said he would be back and wheeled it to his car through the front door. He did this a few times, apparently. A couple of places even helped him load it back into his car. Story 8. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy was not a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler on our city's main street. He discovered the flat next to the jeweler was empty and hid there. For 2 weeks, he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night, causing a massive headache for the police and the business. We went to check and found no sign of anyone and nothing on the cameras. They thought it was a fluke, so the jeweler turned off the alarm and decided to wait until morning to install a new system or rewire the old one. As soon as he heard the police leave, he tore down the wall. He had apparently already been working on it and robbed the place, taking his time. He escaped without anyone noticing for hours, until the jeweler returned in the morning. Then he tried to resell an item that had a serial number and got caught. Not that smart after all. Good effort, though. Story 9. There is a golf course and country club in my town that has a professional golfers association tournament scheduled in the next couple of years. Someone repeatedly breaks in at night, lounges, and eats food, and it is all captured on camera. The club refuses to report it because they do not want to jeopardize their chances of hosting the tournament. Story 10. I worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched a former inmate who was homeless being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and then elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked. It was the middle of January. He did not want to get too cold. Note to those saying you cannot break car windows. That is true, and it also depends on the car. The patrol car they used was an older model used more for the perimeter of the jail unless other patrol cars were in the shop. Those windows had been replaced so many times. I do not know if it is the same material. For those asking for news links, do you really think the news reports small-time incidents? They are not dramatic enough. I could probably find their charges and details and share them, but I am not going to do that to this man. He was a nice person. I am not going to expose him publicly just to prove anything to people for karma or similar reasons. Story 11. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories goes like this. He finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor, and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment. He puts an apartment number, a fake lock, a welcome rug, and so on. He puts an iPhone up for sale. When a buyer comes, he opens the door wearing a bathrobe and says, "Give me 1 second. I'm just going to count the money." Then poof, he has disappeared down the stairwell. Story 12. A friend of my brother moved to Israel, where for a time it was acceptable to drive with a United States driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when the officer asked for his license, he gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse chain in the United States and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer: Costco? What is Costco? Friend: It's the state I'm from. Officer: That sounds made up. Friend: There are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer: I guess not. Friend: Well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer had no response and ended up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. The friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Story 13. One man printed barcodes, brought them into Home Depot and stuck them on merchandise priced around $100. When scanned, the items registered at about $10. Putting random barcodes on items is not obviously illegal and is hard to detect. Another man would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced items, maintaining plausible deniability. They then sold the items on eBay. The only reason they were caught was that the man with the barcode printer and software cut the second man out of the operation. The second man stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on merchandise, and paid for it immediately afterward. He then informed on the first man and revealed they had been doing this weekly for over 4 years. Because investigators could only pin one case on him, the burglary charge was reduced to petty theft, and he served a few days in the county jail and paid a small fine. He probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Story 14. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. A man used a sledgehammer to smash through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was careful to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he did not have to. Alarms did not go off until he exited through a back door. The alarm company received the signal after a minute or two and took 3 to 4 minutes to call us, giving him about a 5-minute head start. He was probably several miles away before we were dispatched. He clearly scoped out the area beforehand. Part of the building was built into a hill, so the hole was on the backside along the grade line. Inside the building it was about 8 feet up, so it was easier for him to leave through a door. The wall section he broke through was hollow concrete block, and the portion of the wall below that was poured concrete. Story 15. Definitely this guy who ate the bank robbery note right off the hood of the police car when they were emptying his pockets. although I am fairly sure he was still convicted. Story 16, here is one. I knew a man in the early 1980s. Let us call him Jim. He wanted a high-powered superbike but knew he could not afford it. So he drove to London and scouted around for a few days until he found that model parked outside a house. He returned that night with a slide hammer, forced the lock and stole the bike. He brought it home, put it in his garage and completely stripped it until only the frame and the bottom half of the engine remained. He dragged those parts into the weeds at the bottom of his garden, poured fuel over them, and burned them a little. A few weeks passed and weeds had started growing over the remains. At that point he called the police and reported that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The police came and he explained that he had just returned from being away and found it. The police took the frame and noted down his name and address. A few days later they called and said the bike had been stolen from London a month or so earlier, identified from the serial number on the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classified the bike as a write-off and told the police to dispose of it. Because the frame had been found in his garden and the insurance company did not want it, the police were obliged to ask if he wanted to keep it or if they should dispose of it. He told them he had always wanted to build a bike. He got the frame back, repainted it, reassembled the machine, and re-registered it with a Q registration recorded as stolen and recovered. I am not Jim. I knew him well. We went to school together and he lived a few doors down from me. I had my own group of friends and occasionally, when we were at the pub, we bumped into him and he told us of his exploits without a care in the world. He proudly told a few people about that bike. But we did not inform the police. He crashed the bike a few months later and was injured, though I cannot remember the details. The last time I saw him, he was a career criminal and he ended up in prison for a while. Many regarded him as scum, but I felt sorry for him. Both his parents died before he was 12 and he was in and out of care homes for years. Of his 4 brothers, one was murdered, another died of an asthma attack, and a third committed suicide. He could never hold down a job and suffered from depression. He had a very difficult life. It has been more than 25 years since I last saw him and I often wonder how he is doing. Story 17. It was the same in the computer rooms. People would cut power to electrical stations, damage the wiring, and then hide, waiting for the police to arrive. When the building owners arrived, they would shut off the power because the wiring was unsafe and needed repair. After everyone left for the night, the thieves would cut away the unpowered wiring to strip the copper. Story 18. This was pretty smart. I used to run bars at several venues in the north of England, including Chester Racecourse. Usually we had to watch for people trying to steal drinks or sneak in without paying. Because it was close to Liverpool, there was a lot of security on site. You could tell them. They were suited and booted, wearing a high-visibility vest and usually carrying a radio. There were a dozen or so bars around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money taken from 100,000 or so customers drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. Every hour or so, security would go around the bars and take all the high-denomination notes from each cash register and put them in the safe in the main building. One day I was pulling pints. The security staff had been round a few times and it was getting busier. Then one man showed up on his own, wearing a high-visibility vest and holding a radio. He processed the cash register and left the usual receipt so we could balance at the end of the event. A bit early, I thought, but I had plenty to do. 10 minutes later, 2 more men arrived, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that yet." "What mate? We're the only 2 doing this duty today." That set off a rapid and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. The man who had worked the till earlier used to work there, so he knew the drill. He had been watching the guards and knew exactly when to time it and in what order. They went around the bars. Apparently he got around 9 or 10 bars before he decided not to push his luck further and walked away with about £80,000. He simply took off the high-visibility vest, dropped the radio, and became just another man in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They tightened the procedure after that. Story 19. There is a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a large river. The only way between the 2 sides is over a long bridge unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. Some people called in 2 or 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some fake packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control and related duties. The perpetrators then called in a bomb threat on the bridge and began robbing places on the other side. The police could not be certain the bomb threat was real and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I first heard this story about 10 years ago in Banff, Alberta. I never bothered to look up what was real and what was invented. I think this is pretty close. But as my father used to say, you cannot let truth get in the way of a good story. Story 20. I have a friend who was a criminal for about 15 years, but was never arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights. He grew weed in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was elderly and never left the house. He bought a building under a fake name, took out huge loans against it, obtained money from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and burned it all down. He sold fake raffle tickets for items he did not have and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He moved many times because people suspected him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar crimes, but he was never even questioned by the police. Now he has a family and a normal job. Story 21. Mandatory. Not a police officer, but the story of the Mumbai Opera House jewelry heist probably belongs here. Sometime in 1987, a man placed an ad in the newspaper seeking recruits for the Central Bureau of Investigation, the investigative police agency in India. A group of people showed up and he rented an office to interview them. He selected 26 candidates and told them to assemble the next day near a popular jewelry shop to practice a mock raid. He had a fake search warrant and other materials ready. He led them to raid the jewelry shop. Together they collected all the jewelry and cash. He then asked the recruits to watch the shop employees while he said he was depositing the items. He walked out and disappeared. It took half an hour for someone to suspect something was wrong and call the real police. They never caught him or discovered his identity. The nerve of that man. Story 22. Not a police officer. We were called to a rollover car accident. When we arrived, the car was empty, so we thought the driver had been ejected. My partner and I began searching for a body nearby. A few minutes later, a police officer told us they thought the driver was a mile down the road walking. We went to check on him. He said he was fine but claimed he had not been driving the car and did not know who had. He had clearly been drinking. During the ride to the emergency room, he told me that as long as the police do not find you in the car, the local district attorney will not pursue drunk driving charges. All you had to do was get out of the car and walk away. Story 23. I am not a police officer, and I would not call this the smartest plan ever, but it was amusing and clever. A while back there were a series of thefts along the bus lines in my country. People's belongings kept disappearing from one city to the next, and nobody had any idea what was happening because the items were stored in the bottom of the bus, to which only the driver had access. It turned out there were two men, one of whom was very small. The larger man put the smaller man inside a suitcase, bought a ticket, checked the suitcase with the other luggage, and rode while the smaller man got out, stole electronics, jewelry, cameras, and other items, then returned to the suitcase until the trip ended. I am not sure how they were caught, but I found the whole thing clever and amusing. Story 24. I remember entering a festival and seeing a magician perform tricks for the people searching him to distract them from the drugs he had. It was a spectacular show, and I'm sure he made a good profit. If the police knew, they would be talking about it here, but I doubt they do. Story 25. Not a police officer, but I once dealt with a criminal who forged court documents to facilitate his own release from prison. Edit. Wow, my first silver and my first gold in one day. Thank you. Story 26. I believe this man was eventually caught, but his idea was impressive. He posted a Craigslist ad and had a group of people show up dressed like him. He then robbed an armored car, ran behind the bank, and escaped on an inner tube. I think I read it on Today I Learned. Story 27. A man named William Smarto noticed a gap where two walls of a bank vault met at a right angle. He rented a safety deposit box and placed a clock with a loud alarm inside to test for sound sensors. On a Friday after closing, he crawled into the gap and waited while employees sealed the vault with him inside. He spent the weekend removing locks with a hammer, stole the contents of multiple safety deposit boxes, then replaced the locks to make them look untampered and returned to his hiding spot. On Monday, while the bank was undergoing renovations, he put on a worker's jacket and walked out with the stolen items. Employees did not discover the theft until a customer opened his safety deposit box and the lock fell in. He was eventually identified after boasting about the crime to his clients. He worked as a hairdresser. Authorities arrested him, and the value of the stolen items could not be determined because safety deposit box contents were unknown. After this case, many banks began filling the gap between adjacent safety deposit cabinets with concrete. A film called Inside Man was later loosely inspired by the incident. Story 28. The story goes like this. A homeowner goes outside one morning to drive to work and finds his car missing. He reports the car stolen to the police. A few days later, his car is back in front of his house. When he goes inside, he finds a note. It is an apology saying the thief was in dire need of quick transportation, and so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noticed the sticker on the car for the local sports team and, to avoid hard feelings, left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove compartment for the homeowner and his family. They attend the game, but when they return home, the house has been ransacked and all items of value are gone. Note: some of you have noted this is an urban legend. Many urban legends have a basis in fact. Story 29. There was an incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where a man wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had numerous alarms. Cutting one would trigger the system, so he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were widespread, and alarms were usually connected to the telephone line. He found 9 access points to one of the telephone company's large trunk lines. Massive copper cables contained tens of thousands of lines. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio equipment store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came from another town where he had done something similar. Authorities had not been able to link that incident to him but suspected him, and he had relocated to Fargo. The police paid him a visit. He refused to let them in because they did not have a warrant, so the police left to obtain one, leaving no one to watch him, and he fled. When they returned, they found the circular saw coated in copper dust and much of the stolen merchandise. He remained at large for a while, but even after he was captured, he had another trick. While being transported between prisons, he used a handmade key to unlock his shackles and climbed out through a roof vent of the transport bus. Story 30. A homeless man in my hometown figured out that if he committed petty theft, he would get a night in jail, a warm place to sleep, and a hot meal. He would show up, turn in the stolen goods, and that was that. After a while, the police would just tell him to take back whatever he had stolen the next day. He became a local character. Story 31. Obligatory, not a police officer. Close to 20 years ago, a man on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern. The bank manager arrived about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning and left the front doors unlocked so staff could let themselves in without a key. One morning, the robber dressed as an office worker and waited for the manager. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he entered the building and threatened him with a gun. He obtained the information he needed to access the vault, tied the manager up, and left him in his office. When staff arrived, he told them the manager had called in sick and that the regional office had sent him to open the branch. No one questioned him. The bank had a small walk-in vault that normally held about 30,000 to 50,000 Australian dollars on any given day, but he had timed the robbery for the morning after business banking day when local businesses made their end-of-week deposits and reportedly took close to 250,000 Australian dollars. Once the vault was open, he pulled his gun and invited all the staff to enter the vault, then locked them in. By that time, the bank was due to open and customers were waiting outside. He told them there was an issue with the computers and that the technical team estimated about 30 minutes to fix it, so they could not open. He then got into his car, drove to the airport, flew to Hong Kong, and disappeared. To my knowledge, the police never caught him and never recovered the money. They believed he had to have left most of it in Australia because you can only take 10,000 Australian dollars in cash out of the country before customs will pull you in for questioning. The assumption was that he had an accomplice who would funnel the money to him slowly. He was later identified after witness statements and closed-circuit television footage led to his getaway car being found at the airport, where he boarded a plane to Hong Kong. That was as far as they could track him. Story 32. Possible urban myth, but I like it. Somewhere in England there was a car park outside a local tourist attraction. Because it was city land, a booth was set up to collect parking fees. Cost about £5 to park. The old man collecting the fees was a pleasant chap and never missed a day of work in 10 years, rain or shine. One day the tourist attraction discovered that no one was manning the booth. Because it was a city-owned lot, they called the city to ask where the parking attendant was. The city replied that they had no parking attendant. The old man was never seen or heard from again. He had built the booth himself and had manned it for 10 years. Story 33. A couple of my friends from high school, who were brothers, stocked shelves and worked in the stockroom at night. Around the time the PlayStation 4 was released, they emptied a large bag of dog food, placed 2 or 3 PlayStation consoles inside, resealed the bag, and waited a few days to purchase it from the stockroom. Story 34. I'm not a police officer, but several years ago in Cape Coral, Florida, a man waited on a sidewalk in front of a Publix grocery store and used a taser on an armored car guard carrying 2 bags of money. A getaway driver in a car with stolen license plates pulled up. The attacker and the driver took the money bags and drove off. They were never caught. When I first moved to the area in the 1990s, a man robbed a bank, jumped on a bicycle and rode down a footpath through some woods to a nearby waterway where he had left a boat. He escaped and was never caught. Story 35. I remember thieves would trigger the alarm of a vacant Blockbuster store after the chain began closing down. They did this for 2 weeks, so the police became convinced it was a false alarm occurring at the exact same time every night and stopped rushing to investigate. One day we found out that the pharmacy next to the Blockbuster had been broken into through the wall they shared. There was only one tiny section of the wall in the pharmacy that was not covered by shelves and panels, so the thieves had to know exactly which part of the Blockbuster wall to break through. I was still impressed by the heist they managed to pull off. Story 36. One of my former coworkers, whom I will call Dave, told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership and was sitting at his desk when a well-dressed gentleman came in and asked to test drive a specific car parked out front. It was a busy day. Usually customers are allowed to test drive alone only after they have provided some form of deposit or official identification, though that detail is not important here. Dave gave the keys to the man. The man went on a test drive and returned after a reasonable amount of time. He handed back the key and received his deposit. This was about closing time, possibly on a Friday, and everything seemed in order. The next business day, Dave's boss arrived and discovered that one of the Mercedes parked out front was missing. Dave explained that the car had been returned and that they still had the key. It turned out the perpetrator had not actually test-driven the car. Instead, he drove somewhere to make a replica of the key and returned the replica to the desk, keeping the original key. The thief got away with the car. To be clear, Dave was not the criminal. He was the employee. It may have been part of an organized group. It is also possible the key was switched rather than copied. I heard this story a few years ago and did not check the technical details of modern car key security. Story 37. I used to work at Chase Bank. At the time, upper management demanded that we bankers work the lobby, meaning we would pull customers from the teller line to help them with transactions, usually as an excuse to solicit new accounts and credit cards. One busy midday, a female banker got up to pull someone from the line. She asked the man if he needed help, and he responded in Spanish that he was okay with waiting. She insisted he come with her, so he followed. He sat at her desk and handed her a note that said he had a bomb and that he was robbing the place. She looked at him and said, "Oh, you have to get in line for this." He did exactly as she told him. She told the manager on the teller side what was going on. He called the man over and opened a window specifically for him. She went to the bathroom to hyperventilate. The manager proceeded to give the bank robber about $10,000. The man left and ran a few blocks where we assumed the getaway car was. Nobody knew what was going on at first. The phone started ringing and I picked it up. This is Chase Corporate Security. We just received an alarm from your branch. Is everything okay? I laughed and said that sounded like a joke. Then I looked up and saw a lot of commotion. A manager locking doors and people shuffling around. I put corporate security on hold, asked the manager, and he confirmed we had been robbed. He took the call. A week later, a similar situation happened at a bank down the street just as they were opening. That branch had double doors on Main Street, a foyer, and double doors into the branch. The robber entered through the Main Street doors, walked into the foyer, and found the doors to the branch locked. He knocked, someone opened a door, and he slipped them a note claiming he had a bomb. The employee read the note and was able to lock the street entrance from the inside, effectively trapping the man in the foyer. The employees all exited out the back, the police were called, and he was arrested without incident. He was not the same man who robbed our branch, but the modus operandi was the same. Spanish speaking with a perfectly crafted note in English. When the police asked where he got the note, he said some men picked him up at a labor site and told him he would make $1,000 just for dropping off the note. Because he did not speak English, he did not know what the note said. I do not know if they ever hit another bank or if they were ever caught, but it has always stuck out to me as one of the smartest crimes I saw. They picked up someone who was unassuming and unknown to them, gave him vague instructions and a note he could not understand, dropped him off at the labor site afterward, and moved on. Story 38. I am not a police officer, but I graduated with a man who traveled to different Walmart stores across the country and bought computers with cash. He would remove parts from the computers, then return them and sell the parts. He made over $1 million. Doing this before he was caught. Each Walmart he targeted has separate charges against him, and it will take a while for the company to build the cases. It is sad to see him go. He was fun to hang out with, but I think his flashy new Corvette gave him away. Story 39. Having worked as a disciplinary officer in corrections, I have always been amazed at the ingenuity of inmates. The problem most run into is the follow-up to the crimes they commit. One night our department received a call that 3 inmates were walking down a street a short distance from the jail. They were caught quickly because they were still wearing their stripes. A roster check revealed 1 inmate was still missing. He was caught about a month later. The ingenuity was in how they escaped. They were housed in one of our maximum security tiers. After lockdown, there is really only one way out of the cell. There is a very narrow window in each cell overlooking the yard. This was never seen as a viable escape risk because the windows were so narrow that one would have to be extremely skinny to squeeze through. Due to lack of staffing, our guard tower stayed unmanned, and they took note of that. They spent a year losing weight and observing the officers who worked the tier, noting which ones were lax in their duties. They loosened one of the windows, and when they finally reached a weight where they could all fit through, they took their opportunity. The officer on duty that night was so lax that he did not notice 4 men enter a 2-man cell at lockdown. He also did not perform a roster check at lockdown. They got out and used a mattress to climb over the razor wire. The problem was they did not have a good strategy after the escape. The one who remained at large the longest was probably the smartest. He parted ways with the 3 men who decided to walk on a street in their prison stripes, but he had no real plan either. He spent his time living in people's fishing camps when the owners were away. He was caught when one camper surprised him and called the department, which was able to locate him shortly thereafter. Story 40. I am not a police officer and I am not as knowledgeable as some people here, but this was probably one of the smartest robberies in my small city. One of the main streets is cut into a hillside, creating a very steep, tall concrete-covered bank immediately behind the buildings. Between 2 buildings there is a gap that was filled at the street end by an automated teller machine. To refill it, the security staff entered the neighboring building, used the side door and walked into the gap, which had the automated teller machine at one end and the steep bank at the other. On the Friday before Christmas, when the automated teller machine was to be filled, one of the robbers abseiled down the bank at night into the gap and waited for the security staff, who arrived early in the morning. As they came through the door into the gap, he held them up, took the money, and escaped through the building to an accomplice waiting in a van on the main street. The van then drove out of the city and disappeared. After a large search, the police found the burnt-out van. The gang had driven it up a gorge road. Two accomplices in cars, one at the top and one at the bottom of the gorge, drove slowly into the gorge to hold up traffic so no one would be there to see them when they turned off down an access road into the bush. They were caught because one member of the gang was a former employee of the security company. Newspaper coverage was published. The black fire exit between the two buildings is where the automated teller machine was. The side road coming off the bottom of the main road is where they turned off the gorge. Story 41. Learns about the smartest criminals, then becomes the smartest criminal himself. Story 42. There was a case in which more than 50 speeding charges were recorded under the name Prao Jazdi. Each incident involved a different person, a different car, and a different disguise. When the government formed a special task force, investigators discovered that Prao Jazdi means driver's license in Polish. The police had been entering Prao Jazdi whenever a driver with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. Story 43. A coworker told me a story about a man who was a terrible person and never got caught, but he was constantly pulling this kind of trick. He would test drive cars that had full-size spare tires, drive down a side road, hide the spare in the nearby woods, return the car, and then come back later to retrieve the tire. It was a way to assemble 4 matching spares by taking them from different dealerships. The dealerships would not know anything had happened until they sold the car. At that point, they might assume the factory forgot to install the spare, and even if that was ruled out, how could they determine which of the many test drivers took the tire? Story 44. I am not a police officer, but I would say D.B. Cooper deserves a mention. He hijacked a plane, received ransom money, released all the passengers, had the plane take off again, and during the second flight parachuted out and was never caught. Story 45. There is a hoarder on the block whose porch is covered in junk. A neighbor is trying to sell their house. For some reason, people on Craigslist seem to think everything on the hoarder's porch is free to take, even though she has called the police repeatedly to say it is not and denies posting about it on Craigslist herself. I wonder who would have a motive to do that. Story 46. I am not a police officer, but when I was younger and worked in retail, some kids came in and stole a bunch of Nike sneakers. They sent one person to the opposite side of the store to set off firecrackers. When loss prevention ran over to see what happened, the thieves escaped through the emergency door on the other side of the building. I realized what was happening and chased them, but they had a getaway car waiting and nearly ran me over. Story 47. A friend's older brother and his friends used to rob cars at movie theaters because people were not coming back for 2 hours. They took their girlfriends, 2 men and 2 women, and waited in their car until they saw a vehicle that suggested a lot of money had been spent on its stereo, usually indicated by booming bass and loud music. They waited until the driver went inside, then waited another 30 minutes to be safe. All 4 walked over together and used a center punch to knock out the driver's window and push it into the seat in one piece. Immediately they opened the doors and, if an alarm was sounding, cut the alarm wires. They then acted casual. As someone in the lot noticed the alarm and looked, they just saw 2 men and 2 women near a car with the doors open, appearing to be people working on a car, which was confirmed when the alarm went off a few seconds later. They proceeded to clean out the car, usually removing amplifiers, subwoofers, speakers, and similar equipment, right in broad daylight. With 4 of them, it looked like a group working on a stereo. They closed the doors and left. They did this for a year or 2 before they were caught because a father waiting for his children observed the entire process. They served time. It was one of the smartest, stupidest things I had ever heard about. Story 48. Not a cop, but my favorite bank robbery is the Bank of America robbery carried out by Anthony Curcio. Summary. A man stole more than $400,000 from a Bank of America with only a can of pepper spray, escaped using an inner tube, and used a large group of Craigslist day laborers as decoys. For 3 months, Curcio observed a Brinks armored car making its deliveries to the Bank of America branch in Monroe, Washington. He took notes on the schedule, diagrammed the bank's camera locations, and noted the armored car's blind spots. He also estimated how much money was being transferred to the bank and how much was being removed through automated teller machines. He decided to use a local creek to escape and created a cable pulley system to quickly pull himself and large bags of cash upstream using a canvas-wrapped inner tube. Curcio's planning culminated with an advertisement he placed on Craigslist a few days before the robbery. The online ad sought 15 to 20 workers for a fictitious city cleanup project, promising $28.50 an hour. The laborers were told to wear jeans, a blue shirt, work shoes, and a yellow safety vest. The ad also told applicants to bring safety goggles and a painter's mask. It directed them to meet in the Bank of America parking lot at the exact time Curcio planned to rob the armored car. On September 30th, 2008, Curcio, dressed identically to his decoys, pretended to work near the bank. He pepper-sprayed the Brinks armored car guard who was pushing a dolly loaded with money into the bank. Curcio grabbed 2 bags containing more than $400,000 and ran toward the creek. When police arrived, the bank parking lot was filled with men matching the robber's description. Story 49. A couple of men came into my old workplace and stole a grand piano. We had a piano that was never played, so the boss decided to sell it. He arranged for a company to collect it. Because many people came and went at work, someone must have learned the piano was being moved. On moving day, a Luton van arrived and 2 men in high-visibility vests claimed they were there to collect the piano. They spent about 15 minutes getting the instrument out of the building and into the van, with some staff assisting. They then got into the van and drove off. No paperwork was signed to confirm the handover. About 40 minutes later, another Luton van arrived. 2 men got out and said they were from the moving company and were there for the grand piano, which caused confusion and laughter as people assumed it was a prank. Long story short, the buyer never received the piano. Story 50. I investigate white-collar crime. If they are smart, they simply work within the law and are called shrewd businesspeople. I only catch the ones who are careless. Story 51. Not police, but corrections. The smartest prisoner I encountered was also the only legitimate psychopath I have known. Young, charming, attractive, and nearly genius when it came to law. Some people waste time while locked up. She did not. Every night she studied law books religiously. In the United States, inmates are granted access to a law library to work their cases. After a couple of years, she dropped her private lawyer and started representing herself successfully, writing motions and appeals, and doing the same for other inmates, often profitably. If there was a technicality to be found, she found it. I imagine these are the kind of people who end up corporate lawyers. She maintained a steady supply of drugs even while in isolation, primarily cocaine. She would instigate officers and inmates, create a situation, then bring a case. Everything had to be documented when she was involved. When you were accused of misconduct and could not prove otherwise, you became a liability. Several good officers were terminated during her stay. Requests to transfer her to other detention centers in the state were denied because no one was willing to take her. She ultimately avoided further prison time and was sent to a drug treatment center. Prolonged cocaine use took its toll, and she had a massive stroke in her mid-20s, leaving her partially paralyzed. That did not stop her. During an altercation, she got out of her wheelchair, picked it up, and beat another prisoner nearly to death with it. That was years ago, and I have no idea what happened to her after I left that line of work. In summary, American Psycho meets lockup. Story 52. This was not a police matter, but this incident made the news and I lived on that road. City council officials in Newport are trying to discover who planted cannabis in flower pots placed to brighten the city. More than 20 illegal plants were discovered growing among begonias and petunias in the street flower displays. By the time the police were informed and examined the specimens, they had already been harvested. The council said it was checking closed-circuit television footage to find the culprits. Local businessman Dean Bedis, who made the discovery, said he had never seen cannabis growing in the wild before and that it was surprising to see. He said it was a rather beautiful plant and stood out, but the plants had gone and he did not know who took them. The leafy plants were growing in view of passers-by on some of the city's busiest streets. Newport councillor Reese Hutchings, who is also a member of the band Goldie Lookin' Chain, said he thought local teenagers were to blame. He joked that it was either kids or the Newport underworld community and that he was pretty sure it was not Alan Titchmarsh. City council officials said they took the matter seriously. A spokesperson said they would inform the police and check their closed-circuit television cameras. Gwent police said that the fact the plants had disappeared made the situation problematic. A police spokesperson said that, now that the plants had apparently disappeared, it was difficult to determine whether they were illegal cannabis plants and, if so, whether they had been deliberately planted for cultivation. Story 53. I'm not a police officer, but this happened at a valet operation downtown at an athletic club. A customer came out to retrieve their vehicle, but the valet could not find the customer's keys. It is not uncommon for a valet to lose a set of keys. The valet called a taxi for the customer to get home and arranged for a new set of keys to be made in the morning. When they returned the next morning, the car was gone. Earlier that night, after the valet had left to retrieve another guest's vehicle, a man dressed as a valet walked up to the key box, took a set of keys, and walked away. He did not take the vehicle immediately. He waited until the middle of the night, when no one was there, then returned, got in the car, and drove away with it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.